Welcome to the deep dive.
Good to be here.
So today we have a really precise, kind of high-stakes mission. They're not just, casually exploring the vast landscape of psychological theory.
Right, not at all.
We are building a strategic blueprint, a shortcut, really, to success.
And specifically for Professor Seghi's Theories of Psychotherapy Final.
Exactly. We're tailoring this whole thing for that multiple-choice format, which, has its own set of rules.
That's so true. Our source material today is it's an incredibly dense high-yield study guide. It covers everything.
Everything from, postmodernism?
Yeah, the radical, non-pathologizing stance of postmodernism, all the way to the superstructured, skill-based approaches of CBT.
And then that tricky section on therapeutic integration.
Oh, yeah. So the goal here is to help you cut through the noise. We want to clarify the core mechanism of change in each model.
And embed the specific language, right?
Yeah.
The keywords that exam setters use as cues.
That's the key.
I think the biggest challenge, for me anyway, with this material isn't learning one theory. It's telling them apart when they're all on the page together.
Yes.
Like knowing the difference between, say, borrowing a technique and actually integrating a theory.
That's where the points are won or lost.
Exactly.
That's a high-stakes question.
Precisely. We need to move past just, basic memorization and get to what we're calling active synthesis.
Active synthesis, I like that.
Yeah, it's about understanding the philosophical DNA of each model so well that you can spot it, no matter how the question is phrased.
So our mission is what? Clarify the big picture differences.
Internalize the hallmark questions and techniques.
And master that nuanced integration vocabulary.
You got it.
Okay, let's unpack this. And I think the most logical place to start is with that radical philosophical break that separates so much of modern therapy from what came before.
Absolutely.
We're starting with postmodern therapies, which, they fundamentally reject the whole idea of a single fixed universal truth about human suffering. That's the perfect place to start. When you step into the world of postmodern thought, so we're talking models like narrative, SFBT, and feminist therapy,
Right.
you have to immediately discard that foundational search for an internal defect.
A pathology.
A pathology, a singular truth about human nature. That whole way of thinking defines psychoanalysis and even some of the early humanistic models.
This shift is, it's seismic. It completely changes where the therapist even looks for the problem.
It does.
Instead of looking inside the client, at their drives, their biology, their cognitive errors, whatever the therapist looks outside.
To the context.
To the social, linguistic, and cultural context. So problems, by definition, are external.
And the study guide highlights 4 critical assumptions here. These are non-negotiable for telling these models apart on an exam. If you see any combination of these, you are in the postmodern camp.
Okay, so the first pillar is that reality is socially constructed. This means the way we understand things like mental health, gender, success. It's not based on some objective natural law.
Right, it's built.
It's built through language, through culture, through relationships. It's a shared agreement, basically, and it can change.
And the second point, which is the essential clinical premise, is that problems are contextual, not individual flaws.
Huge.
It's a massive reframe. So if a client is anxious, the postmodern therapist doesn't ask, what deficit do you have that's causing this anxiety?
Yeah, I ask.
They ask, what circumstances, what social expectations, what oppressive stories are creating this experience of anxiety for you? It's a completely different question and a huge exam cue.
And from there, the third pillar follows directly. The client is automatically positioned as the expert.
The expert on their own life.
On their own life and their reality. The therapist just drops that authoritative role completely and becomes more of a collaborator.
Co-investigator of the client's unique reality.
And the fourth pillar.
Fourth, the therapeutic stance has to be collaborative and non-pathologizing, always. Because if language creates reality, the therapist's job is to use language to help the client construct a new, preferred reality.
Not to just confirm a diagnosis.
Not to confirm a pre-existing pathology.
Okay, so if the problem is defined by language, then changing the story, that's the mechanism of change.
That's it.
Which leads us right into the 2 main ways this idea is put into practice, starting with the famously fast one.
Solution-focused brief therapy.
Right, SFBT.
SFBT, which was pioneered by Steve DeShazer and Insoo Kimberg, is, it is the ultimate pragmatic model. It's radically positive and resource-oriented.
It seems to operate on this core belief that Clients have already solved tons of problems in their lives.
Exactly. And that those successful past experiences hold the key to the solution they need right now.
So their focus is just relentlessly on exceptions, strengths, resources.
And constructing a future without the problem?
They don't just avoid digging into the problem's origins. It seems like they think it's actually a bad idea.
They actively consider it counterproductive. I mean, if the problem is just a story, dwelling on it just reinforces that problem story.
Okay, so the therapist's stance here is the big multiple choice differentiator.
Absolutely. They are brief, pragmatic, and highly hopeful.
But there's a paradox, right? They also adopt this not knowing position.
Yes, a not knowing and genuinely curious position. They are not the experts in the client's problem. They're experts in helping the solutions emerge that the client already has.
Even if they don't know they have them.
Right, even if they aren't aware of them yet.
Let's drill down into the techniques, because these are SFBTs.
Yeah.
These are the high-yield cue points. If you see the technique's name, you know the theory.
Mm-hmm.
First, the most iconic one, the miracle question.
And the precise phrasing here is so important. It's something like, suppose tonight, while you're sleeping, a miracle happens and the problem that brought you here is completely solved.
Okay.
Since you were sleeping, you don't know the miracle happened. What would be the first small sign you would notice tomorrow morning that would tell you that the miracle occurred?
The power of that question isn't magic, it's behavioral. It's a mapping tool.
Totally. It forces the client to bypass all that paralyzing problem talk.
And start to visualize the small, concrete, observable details of what a problem-free life looks like.
And that visualization then defines concrete, manageable behavioral goals. It becomes about what they need to start doing, not just what they need to stop.
Okay, so after the miracle question, we have scaling questions.
Right. These are all about operationalizing progress. On a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 is the day after the miracle and O is when you decided to call me, where are you today?
So it makes these abstract emotional states measurable.
Exactly. And it helps the client recognize these tiny micro shifts in their status or motivation that they'd otherwise miss.
And then there's exception finding.
The idea is that the problem is not a constant universal state, so there must be exceptions.
The therapist is like a detective for those moments.
A detective, yeah. They meticulously search for specific instances when the problem wasn't happening or when it was less severe. Tell me about a time this week when the problem wasn't dominating your thoughts, even for just 30 minutes.
And by amplifying those exceptions, you're basically showing that the capacity for change, the resource, it's already there.
It's already in the client's experience. It externalizes the control, showing the client that they, not the problem, are responsible for those exceptions.
And lastly, there are techniques that affirm resilience.
Right, coping questions. Things like, given how incredibly difficult things are, how have you managed to keep going and even get to a 3 on the scale?
And also just genuine behavioral compliments.
Yes, explicitly naming and reinforcing small successes and their resilience.
So to summarize for the exam, SFBT equals miracle question, scaling, exceptions.
Brief format and a laser focus on the future.
Okay, got it. Now let's shift to narrative therapy.
Founded by Michael White and David Epstein.
We're still in that world of language and stories, but the mission feels really different. It's not just about finding solutions. It's about reauthoring identity.
That's the perfect way to put it. If SFBT is about finding a functional path forward, narrative is about changing the map completely.
And the core mechanism here, the non-negotiable concept, is externalization.
Yes, that's the one you have to know for narrative therapy. It's the process of separating the person from the problem. The problem is seen as this external oppressive thing.
Acting upon the client.
Right. Rather than something that's inherent within them.
And this shift is actually really profound. It's not just playing with words.
Oh, not at all. So instead of saying, I am an anxious person, the therapist helps the client identify the problem as anxiety, almost personifying it.
So they might ask something like, when did anxiety start telling you what you could and couldn't do?
Exactly. Or how does worry manage to creep into your thoughts just before bed?
That separation, the client is not the problem, it allows the client to, team up with the therapist?
It lets them unite with the therapist to fight a shared enemy. It totally liberates the client's identity from that problem-saturated narrative.
Which brings us to this tension between dominant stories versus preferred stories.
The dominant story is that problem-saturated narrative that the client has been telling themselves and hearing from others. You know, the story that defines them through their failures or their diagnosis.
And the therapist's job is to excavate the preferred story.
Exactly. The narrative that's actually aligned with the client's values and their hopes and their strengths.
How do they do that? How do they find it?
Through the search for unique outcomes.
Okay.
These are the small, often totally unnoticed moments when the client acted outside the rules of the dominant story. Times when the problem did not dominate.
So they're like little glimmers of the other story.
They're the seeds of the preferred story, and the therapist treats them not as accidents, but as evidence of this burgeoning preferred identity.
Narrative therapy also does something called deconstruction.
Yes, active deconstruction. Since reality is socially constructed, the therapist helps the client question those oppressive cultural narratives.
Like about gender roles or what success should look like.
Or family duty, right. Anything that might have contributed to that problem-saturated identity. It's basically asking, who benefits from you believing this story about yourself?
The questions themselves are great exam cues. They focus on influence and effect.
Right. So for externalization mapping influence, they'd ask, how has this problem, let's say, anxiety affected your ability to pursue school, your relationships, your mood?
Not, how did you cause this?
Never.
And the ultimate goal is reauthoring.
Literally rewriting the ending or even the title of the client's story. A therapist might say, if this unique outcome became the new central chapter of your life, what would the title of this new story be?
Okay, quick recap. Narrative means externalize the problem, focus on stories and language.
Reauthoring identity and that meticulous search for unique outcomes.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, our final postmodern model, feminist therapy, it just broadens the frame dramatically.
It really does. It accepts the ideas of social constructionism and non-pathologizing collaboration. But it fundamentally grounds psychological distress in a macro socio-political context. It's all about power and oppression.
So this model is built on social constructionism, empowerment, intersectionality, and social justice.
And the defining belief, the one that's critical for exam recognition, is that distress has to be understood through a socio-political lens.
Looking specifically at how systemic power imbalances operate in the client's life.
Right.
Let's just isolate the key principles here because these are definitely going to be tested. First, the big one, the personal is political.
This means that an individual's internal struggles, like an eating disorder, depression, self-doubt, they are directly linked to and often caused by larger systemic issues.
Sexism, racism, classism.
Heterosexism, you name it. It reframes the person's suffering as a valid reaction to an unjust, oppressive environment.
So it shifts the focus away from individual blame.
Completely. Shifts it to systemic pressure.
Second principle, power analysis.
The therapist explicitly works with the client to understand how different forms of privilege and oppression, both institutional and interpersonal, actually function in their specific life.
So it's not just a general lecture on inequality.
Not at all. It's a collaborative examination of how power affects the client's choices and their distress.
Third, and this is so central to any modern understanding of this model, is intersectionality.
Yeah, the concept from Kimberly Crenshaw. It recognizes that our multiple identity factors, race, class, gender, sexuality, they don't exist in a vacuum.
They interact.
They interact to create unique, compound experiences of privilege and oppression. You can't analyze the experience of being a woman without also considering the impact of her race and her economic status at the same time.
And fourth, consciousness raising.
Right. This often happens in groups, but can happen individually too, where the client realizes their struggle is shared by others who are facing similar systemic barriers.
That moment of, it's not just me.
It's the system.
Yeah.
That realization is profoundly validating. It's often the first step toward empowerment.
So the interventions that come from this are structural.
They have to be. You see gender role analysis, where the client explores how rigid, socially prescribed roles have limited them.
You see reframing distress as a normal, healthy response to oppressive conditions.
And the goal is empowerment, often supporting client-consistent social action, moving that internal realization toward external advocacy or change.
Exam 2 summary for this one. If the question focuses on power, oppression, systemic injustice, personal is political, empowerment, or intersectionality.
It will land squarely on feminist therapy. It's the only one that defines the problem as being rooted primarily in social hierarchy.
That transition from postmodern to humanistic is It feels like conceptual whiplash.
It really is.
In postmodernism, truth is outside and it's co-created. Now, we shift completely inward.
Exactly. We're shifting from models that argue reality is created by language and context to models that argue reality is discovered through subjective internal experience in the present moment.
We're talking humanistic and existential therapies.
That's the family. And they share several foundational themes that should immediately cue you into this group of theories.
First, the massive emphasis on subjective experience.
Yeah.
Phenomenology.
Right, meaning the client's perception of their reality is the only valid place to start.
Second, a focus on these intrinsic human concerns. Freedom, responsibility, the search for meaning.
And third, and this is arguably the most crucial distinction, the therapeutic relationship itself is the central mechanism of change.
Right, so techniques, even when they're used like in Gestalt, they're always secondary to the quality of that relational encounter.
Always.
Okay, let's start with Carl Rogers and person-centered therapy, or PCC.
When you're analyzing PCC, the concept you have to anchor yourself to is the actualizing tendency.
Right. This is the core belief that people are fundamentally trustworthy and have this inherent, almost biological drive to grow, to self-maintain, and move toward wholeness.
Provided, and this is the key, provided the right psychological climate is present.
So the therapist isn't doing therapy to the client.
Not at all. The therapist's job is to create the environment in which the client can access their own inherent capacity for change. The therapist's presence, their way of being, is the intervention.
This brings us to Rogers' 3 core conditions. I mean, this is universally non-negotiable exam material.
Oh yeah, they're frequently tested on their definitions and their necessity. Rogers claimed these 3 conditions were necessary and sufficient for therapeutic personality change.
Okay, condition 1, empathy.
And not sympathy. It's a deep, precise, non-possessive understanding of the client's internal frame of reference.
Walking in their shoes.
Walking in their shoes and communicating that understanding back to them effectively. It's what allows the client to feel truly seen.
Condition 2, unconditional positive regard, UPR.
This is total acceptance. A non-judgmental valuing of the client as a person, regardless of their behavior, their feelings, their choices.
So the therapist separates the worth of the person from their specific actions.
Exactly. And this is a point of comparison that comes up. How does UPR contrast with, say, CBT?
Where you get conditional feedback based on how a skill works out.
Right. In CBT, a behavioral experiment might fail, and you have to adjust. In PCC, the client always remains fundamentally valued, no matter the outcome.
And condition 3, congruence.
Often called genuineness or authenticity, it just means the therapist is integrated and transparent in the relationship. They're being real, not hiding behind some professional mask.
Their internal experience and their external communication are aligned.
And the synergy of these 3 conditions creates a safe space.
A space where the client can drop their defensive masks, increase their awareness of their own experience.
And reconnect with that innate actualizing tendency.
So if a question asks which model believes the healing power rests solely in the quality of the relationship and these 3 characteristics,
The answer is PCC, every time.
okay. Now moving to Gestalt therapy, a model that's much more active and experiential.
Yeah, a lot more.
We're still in the present moment and subjective experience, but we're adding concepts of embodiment, awareness, and direct action.
The founders, Fritz and Laura Perls, they really emphasized integration over analysis.
And the focus of Gestalt is this intense here and now awareness.
It's often called the immediate experience. The goal is for the client to become fully aware of what they are sensing, feeling, and doing in this precise moment.
Bringing fragmented or disowned parts of the self back into consciousness.
Right. And this is why embodiment is so central.
The therapist doesn't just listen to the words.
No, they observe how the body is holding the story. Posture, shallow breathing, chronic tension, fidgeting.
All of that's data.
It's all manifestations of avoidance or conflict. The therapist might ask, notice where you feel that tension in your shoulders right now. What happens if you give that tension a voice?
A key concept for the exam here is unfinished business.
These are unresolved feelings, maybe unexpressed resentment toward a parent, unacknowledged grief.
Lingering guilt.
Lingering guilt, exactly. Things that are not fully brought into awareness. And because they're unresolved, they're carried into the present.
Influencing current behavior and relationships.
Right, often manifesting physically or emotionally.
So when these unresolved conflicts are identified, the therapist uses experiential techniques to move them toward closure.
And the absolute signature technique, the non-negotiable Gestalt cue, is the empty chair.
Right.
The empty chair is a dialogue technique. The client engages in an imagined dialogue with a significant person, past or present, or a disowned part of themselves.
Like the top dog versus the underdog.
Exactly, the critical self versus the passive self. And crucially, the client physically switches seats to embody the other role
Why is switching seats so important?
because it facilitates integration. By physically embodying the opposing force, feeling the weight of the criticism, and then defending against it, the client gains this holistic understanding.
It leads to a resolution, or at least a clearer picture, instead of just being stuck in a one-sided conflict.
That's the goal.
Okay, exam cue recap. Gestalt means present moment, embodiment, the experiential focus.
The empty chair technique and confronting unfinished business.
Got it. Okay, existential therapy. This feels less about specific techniques and far more about philosophy.
That's exactly right. Its clinical application, championed by figures like Viktor Frankl, Rollo May, Irvin Yalom, is all about helping clients confront the inherent anxieties that just come with being alive.
So the focus is helping clients confront these fundamental givens of existence.
Universal, unavoidable truths about the human condition. These givens are the source of our existential anxiety, but they're also the levers that push us toward living authentically.
These givens seem like prime material for a multiple-choice test.
Oh, absolutely. They define the whole therapeutic domain. So first, you have freedom and responsibility.
The idea that we are radically free to choose our past.
We're the authors of our lives,
Yep.
but that freedom comes with this terrifying total responsibility for the consequences of those choices.
And clinically, the anxiety comes from being paralyzed by that responsibility.
Right, which leads to avoidance or living in what they call bad faith.
Okay, second given.
Isolation and connection. We're fundamentally born alone and we die alone. We exist in a singular consciousness.
Yet we desperately crave connection.
And that's the rub. Existential isolation is recognizing that no matter how close we are to others, there's always this unbridgeable gap.
Third, meaning versus meaninglessness.
The universe does not provide some inherent pre-written script or meaning for us. We have to create our own.
So clinically, facing that meaninglessness can lead to neurosis or nihilism.
Or distraction like compulsive consumption. The therapy often involves logotherapy, the search for meaning, as Frankl called it.
And the last one, death and mortality.
The undeniable reality that life is finite. And awareness of death isn't meant to be morbid. It's what structures our choices. It increases the urgency to live authentically now.
And the anxiety is when we deny or avoid that ultimate fact.
Precisely.
So the therapist's role in this framework is absolutely key.
Yes, they are a fellow traveler. They are not an expert who diagnoses pathology or prescribes meaning.
They just accompany the client on this really arduous journey of confronting these difficult truths.
Helping them tolerate the necessary anxiety that's required to construct an authentic life. They're asking questions about purpose and courage and commitment.
Okay, exam cue recap. Existential equals confrontation of the givens, freedom, responsibility, meaning death, and the pursuit of authenticity.
You got it.
All right, now we shift deep into the past.
Deep into the past, into the territory of the unconscious, where the overall goal is understanding and revising these deep relational patterns and integrating dissociated parts of the self.
We're in psychoanalytic and psychodynamic territory.
History matters most here.
We should probably just briefly anchor in traditional psychoanalysis. The structural model, so ad, ego, superego.
Right. The reliance on drives, sex and aggression, and the therapist as a neutral blank screen.
And the process was mostly about uncovering repressed material, getting insight into the root cause, and interpreting transference.
But for contemporary practice, and for most academic exams today, the focus is really on the modern or relational psychodynamic approach.
Okay.
And the foundational shift is moving away from purely biological drives and focusing intensely on the centrality of attachment, early relationships, and the resulting internal working models.
So the client's internal world is basically a map of their past relationships.
That's a great way to put it. And this shift is technically vital for the exam. The focus changes from intrapsychic conflict driven by biology to
Interpersonal conflict driven by learned relational patterns.
Exactly. The client's problems are seen as attempts to adapt to these early, often imperfect relational environments.
And this changes the therapy relationship completely. So
Yeah.
transference, the client projecting past dynamics onto the therapist, it's no longer a one-way street.
No, now it's understood as co-created. The therapist contributes to the dynamic in the room just by being a unique person who is interacting with the client's past expectations.
Because the relationship is co-created, the modern therapist is responsive, they're attuned, emotionally present.
Engaged, which is a sharp contrast with the silent, reserved, blank screen neutrality of the traditional model.
Two elements of modern practice are supposed to be exceptionally high yield.
They are. First, using countertransference as valuable information or data.
Okay, so the therapist's own emotional reaction to the client.
Their sudden feeling of boredom or irritation or being overly needed. It's not just their neurosis. It's often a key piece of information that reflects how the client habitually makes other people feel.
It's a window into the client's internal working models playing out in real time.
Right. And this is a crucial distinction. In traditional analysis, countertransference was something to be analyzed and suppressed by the analyst. In modern work, it's a therapeutic tool to be explored with the client.
Okay, and the second high yield element.
The explicit and ongoing exploration of the immediate therapy relationship, focusing on rupture and repair.
A relational rupture. So when the client feels misunderstood or judged or let down by the therapist,
Discussing and working through that event in the room allows the client to revise their deep, learned expectations that relationships always end in abandonment or disappointment.
so the repair process itself is a central mechanism of change.
A huge one.
Okay, exam cue recap. If you see relational, attachment-based, co-created transference, countertransference as data, or rupture and repair, think modern psychodynamic.
And the focus is always on how deep historical patterns are playing out in the here and now relationship with the therapist.
Right. Okay, switching gears again, we're moving to the empirical, structured, skill-based world of cognitive behavioral and behavioral therapies.
These models prioritize measurable outcomes, skill acquisition.
And the idea that psychological problems come from faulty learning or maladaptive interpretations.
Change here comes from applying specific skills and restructuring those interpretations.
Huh.
The theories are highly manualized, which makes them great for focused, structured interventions that are taught and practiced, often with homework.
Right, homework. Let's start with cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT.
CBT starts with a core model that you absolutely have to internalize. It's the sequence of human experience.
The cycle. Situation, automatic thought, emotion, behavior, physiology.
And the crucial insight of CBT is that the event itself is rarely the problem. We don't respond directly to the situation.
We respond to our interpretation of it.
Our interpretation of the situation, the automatic thought. If you interpret a neutral look from a colleague as contempt, you'll feel anxiety, which leads to avoidance, which just reinforces the initial thought.
So CBT interventions target those interpretations.
Exactly. But to target them, you first have to identify the common distortions.
And the exam will definitely test your ability to recognize these patterns in scenario questions. Let's get the definitions clear.
Okay, first, all or nothing thinking, or black and white thinking.
Viewing things in absolute extreme categories. No middle ground.
So if your presentation wasn't perfect, it was a total disaster.
Next, catastrophizing.
Predicting the worst possible outcome based on little or no evidence. If you feel dizzy, you immediately assume you're having a heart attack.
Mind reading.
Assuming you know what others are thinking without any real proof, and usually assuming the worst. My friend didn't text me back because they're secretly angry at me.
And this one is crucial. Emotional reasoning.
Yes. The belief that because you feel something, it must be true, regardless of objective evidence. I feel immense guilt, therefore I must have done something awful to deserve it.
Or, I feel incompetent, therefore I am incompetent.
Right. And the core techniques of CBT are designed to attack these distortions. We start with thought records.
These are those structured forms to document the whole cycle, right? To capture the exact words of the automatic thought.
Exactly. It makes the thought, which is usually so fleeting, available for analysis.
Then comes cognitive restructuring, often using Socratic questioning.
Which is not telling the client they're wrong. It's asking probing questions like, what is the evidence supporting this thought? Or what are some alternative explanations for this event?
To help the client logically dismantle their own irrational thought patterns.
And we also use behavioral experiments.
So if a client believes, if I apply for that job, I will definitely fail, the experiment is to
apply for the job and see what objectively happens. You test the thought's accuracy in real life. The outcome becomes the evidence for the next thought record.
And finally, behavioral activation.
A technique specifically for depression. You schedule and increase reinforcing value-based activities to break that cycle of avoidance and lethargy.
Okay, exam cue recap. CDT means the thoughts, feelings, behaviors model, identifying and challenging cognitive distortions.
And structured, skill-based interventions using thought records and Socratic questioning.
Right. Now, for pure behavioral therapy, which just ignores the C, the cognition.
Right. It focuses exclusively on observable, learned behavior. The core idea is simple. Behavior is learned through conditioning. If you change the environment, the antecedents or consequences, you change the behavior.
And the way they analyze it is the functional analysis, or the ABC model.
Antecedent, the environmental cue. Behavior, the measurable action. Consequence, what happens right after that, reinforces or punishes it.
To change the behavior, you modify the A or the C.
That's the formula.
Now, for the key anxiety reduction techniques, because these are so often confused on multiple choice questions, we have exposure therapy.
Which is repeated, controlled contact with a feared stimulus. This could be in vivo, in real life, or imaginal.
And the goal of exposure is pretty straightforward. Sustained contact leads to habituation.
The fear response naturally decreases over time because the client learns through repeated experience that the feared thing doesn't happen, or that the anxiety peak is tolerable and it passes.
And this has to be distinguished from systematic desensitization.
Very important distinction. While they both address fear, desensitization specifically combines deep muscle relaxation techniques with gradual imaginal exposure, moving up a fear hierarchy.
The technical distinction for the exam is the underlying principle.
Which is reciprocal inhibition.
Okay, what is that?
It's the physiological principle that two competing physiological states, in this case deep relaxation and intense anxiety, cannot coexist at the same time.
So by introducing relaxation as a competing response during the imagined exposure, the anxiety is inhibited.
Inhibited and eventually extinguished.
We mentioned behavioral activation already, but it's worth hitting again as a core tool, specifically for depression.
Right. The structured planning of activities to counteract the lethargy and withdrawal you see in depressive cycles.
And finally, generic skills training.
Like assertiveness training or communication skills. Adaptive behaviors to replace maladaptive ones.
Okay, exam cue recap. Behavioral means learning principles, the ABC functional analysis, exposure, reinforcement.
And that crucial distinction of reciprocal inhibition for systematic desensitization.
Perfect. We've reached the final section.
And as we noted at the top, this is where precision matters most. Exam writers love to test whether you know the difference between just borrowing a technique and truly synthesizing a theory.
So this section requires precise definition recall. We're looking at the 5 categories of blending models.
Let's make sure we define the philosophical commitment level of each one.
Let's start at the bottom with the least sophisticated, syncretism.
This is defined as a loose, unplanned, atheoretical mixing of techniques. There's no coherent rationale or case conceptualization behind it.
It's the grab bag approach.
That's the pejorative term for it, yeah. A therapist grabbing a Gestalt tool one day and a psychodynamic interpretation the next, just because they felt like it. It lacks systematic thought.
Okay, next up is common factors.
This is more of a perspective than a technique. It argues that what makes therapy work are the non-specific ingredients shared by all successful therapies.
Like the therapeutic alliance.
The quality of the alliance, empathy, positive expectations, the client's inherent strengths. Proponents argue these factors statistically outweigh the impact of any specific technique, like the miracle question or the empty chair.
Then we have technical eclecticism.
This is the pragmatic toolbox model. The therapist selects techniques from a bunch of different models based purely on the client's problem or symptoms.
But, and this is the key, they explicitly do not try to integrate the underlying theories of change.
Right. They just operate on the premise. If the technique works, use it. A classic example is Lazarus's multimodal therapy, which organizes assessment by the basic ID framework, but borrows tools from everywhere.
Okay, now we're moving to actual theoretical blending.
Yeah.
Assimilative integration.
Here, the therapist has one primary strong theoretical home. Let's say they're fundamentally person-centered or psychodynamic.
Okay.
But they thoughtfully and systematically integrate techniques or concepts from other models, using their main theory as the organizing framework. The core conceptualization stays unified by that primary model.
And finally, the most complex form, theoretical integration.
This is the creation of a true synthesis. 2 or more theories are blended together to create a new, unified model of change where the theories themselves are reconciled.
So it's not just borrowing a technique.
No, it's arguing that the philosophies are compatible enough to form a superior third approach.
And the prime examples here are crucial.
They are dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, which merges the structured skills and behaviorism of CBT with the acceptance principles of Zen Buddhism and the philosophical concepts of dialectics,
And the other big one is emotionally focused therapy, EFT.
which synthesizes humanistic principles with Gestalt and attachment theory to understand emotional bonding.
Okay, to lock these in for the exam, let's just do a quick recognition matrix.
Good idea.
If the description involves a disorganized, messy mixing of interventions with absolutely no guiding theoretical principle,
That's syncretism. Avoid it.
if the question focuses on the quality of the relationship, hope, or empathy as the primary driver of change across all models,
You're looking at common factors.
if the therapist uses multiple techniques like a Gestalt chair and a CBT thought record,
Yeah.
but explicitly states they are not integrating the philosophical concepts, just using what works, that is,
Technical eclecticism.
if the description states the therapist has a home-based theory, like a psychodynamic therapist borrowing a behavioral technique and organizes everything through that lens.
That's a simulative integration.
And if the question describes a new named theory like DBT or EFT that merges the theories of change themselves into a philosophical
This is
synthesis.
for theoretical integration.
Phew, that was a comprehensive sprint across some foundational differences.
From social constructivism to behavioral conditioning, yeah, we've managed to cover a staggering amount of conceptual territory in one sitting.
So what does this all mean for walking into Professor Segi's final?
I think the final challenge isn't just recalling the names, it's correctly identifying the model's primary source of truth or the location of the problem.
Right. Is the problem rooted in unconscious historical relational patterns?
That's psychodynamic.
Is it located in faulty cognitive interpretations?
CBT?
Or is it a result of sociopolitical oppression?
Feminist. That's the game.
And using those distinct hallmark techniques, the miracle question, the empty chair, Socratic dialogue, power analysis, as powerful mental anchors.
That's your fastest way to recall the entire theoretical framework under the pressure of a multiple choice setting. If you recognize the tool, you recognize the theory.
And as we close, it kind of leaves us with this complex reality that therapists have to face every day in practice. We've looked at models like Rogers' person-centered approach, which asserts the client has this inherent internal actualizing tendency to heal and grow.
Right.
And then we have feminist therapy, which argues the client's distress is overwhelmingly caused by external systemic barriers and sociopolitical oppression,
Two very different worldviews.
which raises a final provocative thought that really defines the cutting edge of contemporary therapy. If a client comes in reporting anxiety, and the therapist fundamentally believes in the power of the client's internal subjective growth potential, how must they conceptually grapple with the idea that the client's suffering is primarily a function of their marginalized identity and external constraint?
Wow. How do those two vastly different worldviews, radical internal potential versus overwhelming external constraint, how do they synthesize in real ethical practice?
That's the challenge that awaits you after the final. Good luck with your final preparations. You now have the ultimate blueprint.
You've been in the deep dive. We'll catch you next time.